My wife made me walk every morning to lose my baby weight while driving behind me to make sure I didn't stop. What his father did next left her begging for forgiveness. The morning I finally understood what was happening to me, I was standing in the middle of our street at 5:41 a.m., doubled over, with one hand pressed against my abdomen and the other braced on my knee. The sky was that strange gray-violet color it gets before the sun commits to anything.
My incision felt like someone had pressed a lit match against my skin from the inside. 7 weeks post-C-section. 7 weeks since they'd cut through the layers of my body to pull my daughter into the world. And behind me, my wife laid on the horn. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked at her face through that windshield, that patient, disappointed face, like I was a project she'd taken on that kept underperforming, I was going to do something I couldn't take back. So I just breathed, counted to 3, and kept moving. That was day 11. By day 11, I'd stopped being shocked. That's the part that scares me most when I think back on it. Somewhere between day 1 and day 11, Priya had successfully redefined my baseline. What would have horrified any reasonable person had become for me simply Wednesday. I need to back up, because if I don't give you context, you'll spend this whole story waiting for some monster to appear. And the thing is, Priya was never a monster. That's what makes this so hard to explain, and so easy for people like her to get away with. We'd been married 8 years, met at a mutual friend's engagement party when I was 27. Her 29. She was confident without being aggressive, which I took for security. She asked questions. She remembered your answers. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like the most capable person in the room, and then, slowly, over years, made you feel like the least. We already had Marco. He was mine from a previous relationship, and Priya had embraced him without hesitation when he was 5. That gesture bought her years of goodwill with me, probably years more than it deserved. Our daughter, Isla, wasn't planned, but she was wanted, or I thought she was. Priya had talked about having a child together for years. When I got pregnant at 36, she held my hand at every appointment. Happy, attentive, or what I read as happy and attentive. The pregnancy was complicated. I developed a placenta issue at 31 weeks, which meant modified rest, additional monitoring, and a scheduled C-section at 37 weeks. I gained 38 pounds. My OB, Dr. Gabriel Santos, told me this was appropriate for the circumstances. My healing was the priority. My weight was not a medical concern. Priya never said anything about my weight while I was pregnant. She waited. The appointment where everything started was 6 weeks postpartum. Standard checkup. Dr. Santos's office, with its framed anatomy illustrations and a scale I'd been avoiding at home. He reviewed my healing, progressing on schedule, and told me what I could and couldn't do. Light walking was fine. Running, any high-impact exertion, 8 weeks minimum, probably 10. He looked at Priya when he said it, because she had asked the question. He needs to let this heal, Dr. Santos said. He was direct, which I'd always appreciated. The abdominal repair isn't complete. Stress on that tissue right now could cause real damage. Priya nodded, the way people nod when they've already decided to ignore you. Don't worry, Dr. Santos, she said. I'll take care of him. Dr. Santos gave me a look I didn't know how to read at the time. Later I would understand it perfectly. He'd seen this before. We weren't out of the parking structure before her face changed. It happened the way a screen switches off. That sudden, total absence. The warmth just went. He's being overcautious, she said, half to herself, half to me. Not about Dr. Santos, about me. Priya, he said 8 weeks. You still look like you did at 6 months. She didn't glance at me. Her eyes stayed on the road. Do you want everyone seeing that at the Rivera's dinner next month? I didn't say anything. I was holding Isla in the back seat, and I looked down at her face, and I breathed. That night, Priya set my shoes beside the bed, like she was leaving a gift. 5:30. She said, be ready. I thought she was venting. I thought she needed to feel in control, and this was posturing, and by morning she'd have forgotten or softened. I'd seen that pattern before and learned to wait it out. Then the alarm went off. I still wasn't sure. Even then, I sat up slow. My core was compromised, which meant I had to roll to my side first, then push, and I thought, she won't actually do this. She's not this person. Priya came in with Isla, picked her up from the bassinet, and pointed at my shoes. Up, she said. She handed me Isla to nurse, waited 10 minutes, took the baby back, and pointed at the door. I put the shoes on. When I got to the front step, Priya was standing at the driver's side of her Audi with her keys in her hand. Aren't you walking too? I asked. She smirked. Not a cruel smirk. That's the wrong word. A comfortable one, like she'd been waiting for someone to notice the obvious. I'm not the one who needs to lose weight. She got in the car and started following me at 5 miles per hour while I moved down Sycamore Court in the dark. The pain started at the corner, the one with the cracked streetlight and the Peterson's overgrown hedge, a tight burning sensation low across my abdomen, right along the horizontal scar. I stopped, put my hand to my stomach. Priya honked. Keep moving, she called through the cracked window. You stop, you restart the clock. There was no clock. It was a thing she'd invented to keep me afraid of stopping. It worked. I kept moving. That was day 1. By day 4, I'd learned the rules. If I argued before we left, she lectured. Detailed, calm, exhausting lectures about my lack of discipline and how I was modeling weakness for Marco. If I cried outside, she called me fragile and said the neighbors could see. If I slowed to a walk, the horn. 2 short blasts, like a disappointed teacher tapping a desk. The neighborhood was waking up to us. I could feel it. Mr. Okafor, who was retired and kept early hours and grew dahlias along his front fence, had started coming outside with his tea when he heard the Audi idling. He'd watch me pass with this expression on his face that I chose not to examine too closely. Curtains moved. A woman I didn't know well always happened to be bringing in her recycling bins. Nobody said anything to me. I told myself it wasn't that bad. Marco noticed first, the way teenagers notice everything you try to hide. He was 16, and he had his mother's eyes and his grandmother's stubbornness, and he had figured out Priya years before I was ready to. He didn't like her. He was civil because he was smart enough to understand that open conflict would only make my situation worse, but he watched her the way you watch something you don't trust. On day 7, he was the one holding Isla when I came in from the walk. He was handing her back to me when he stopped. Dad. His voice went flat in that way that means he's keeping himself very controlled. You're bleeding through your shirt. I looked down. Dark spot, right at the waistband. I'd felt the sting, but I'd been ignoring stings for 7 days. It's fine, I said. I said it automatically, which scared me later. Priya appeared in the doorway. She'd parked and come in through the garage. Don't baby him, she said. He needs this. You can't accommodate people into getting better. Marco didn't look at her. He looked at me, and his expression said everything he was too smart to say out loud. I want to describe what it was like inside the house, because the street was where it was visible. Inside was where it was made. The inside version was quieter and harder to point to. Priya had a talent. I've come to understand it as a talent, a particular and practiced one, for making you feel like your reaction was the problem. When I said I was in pain, the conversation became about whether I was catastrophizing. When I said I was exhausted, the conversation became about the importance of pushing through difficulty. When I said I was scared that I was hurting myself, the conversation became a lecture on resilience and how the men in her family had recovered from things far harder than a scheduled C-section without complaint. Her grandfather had worked in a foundry for 30 years with a bad shoulder. Her uncle had returned to construction 2 weeks after a hernia repair. I heard about these men so often, I started to feel like I knew them personally. They were invoked like saints, proof that suffering quietly was not just possible but morally correct, and that my inability to do so was a character flaw, not a medical reality. She monitored what I ate, too. She didn't control my plate. She was smarter than that. She just commented, "That's a lot of bread. You're having seconds? I thought you said you were committed. Small, precise, surgical. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there, and over days it compounds. I started eating standing over the sink when she wasn't home, which is something I still catch myself doing and have to deliberately undo. I don't tell you this to build a case exactly. I tell you this because I want you to understand how a person who is not stupid, not passive, not without a sense of self, a man who had a career and a son and an opinion about things, ends up at 5 in the morning on a public street, bleeding through his shirt, still moving his feet. It happens in the inside rooms first. The wound care nurse at Dr. Santos's office was named Thomas Abara, RN, with 12 years in surgical recovery. I called him 4 days after the bleeding because I'd been telling myself for 96 hours that it was fine, it was minor. Bodies do weird things postpartum. Thomas was the one who told me to come in same day. The news wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't good. A section of the incision had opened slightly, a small dehiscence, he called it, about 2 centimeters, and there were early signs of inflammation that could progress to infection if I kept applying stress to that tissue. He cleaned it, dressed it, and looked me in the eye. "What kind of exercise have you been doing?" he asked. "Walking," I said. "Some jogging." His pen stopped. "Jogging." "Yes." "How far?" "Maybe 2 miles. Every morning." Thomas Abara put down his pen and folded his hands on the desk and asked me, very carefully, whether I was doing this by choice. I told him yes. I believed it when I said it. He didn't look like he believed me. He made notes in my chart. He told me to stop the jogging immediately and return in 4 days. He said if the opening worsened, I'd be looking at surgical reclosure under local anesthesia. I didn't tell Priya about the appointment. She found out because she checked my phone that evening. She always checked my phone. "Thomas Abara," she read off my screen. "Wound care?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "You went without telling me. I needed to get it looked at. And?" "He said to stop the jogging." She nodded slowly. A long silence then. "He doesn't know your body the way I do." That sentence. That exact sentence. A wound care nurse with 12 years of surgical recovery experience doesn't know my body. But my wife, who had never given birth, who had no medical training, who had watched me bleed through my shirt and kept driving. She did, but it didn't shatter anything. By day 10, I was past shattering. What abuse does that nobody tells you about? It doesn't break you all at once. It revises you, slowly, morning by morning, horn blast by horn blast, until the version of you that knew your own pain stops feeling like a reliable narrator. I stopped calling my brother, Remy. He would have asked questions, and I didn't have answers I was willing to say out loud. I stopped returning my mother's messages in the same day. I started sleeping in increments, 2 hours, then the baby, then Priya's alarm, then the walk, then collapse, and somewhere in the exhaustion, Priya's voice became the loudest thing in my head. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was being weak. Maybe this was what getting back to myself looked like, and I just didn't have the discipline to see it. I know how that sounds. I know. But sleep deprivation is a documented tool of coercive control for a reason. A person who cannot sleep cannot think straight. A person who cannot think straight will eventually start borrowing someone else's thoughts. Priya had a lot of thoughts she was happy to lend me. She'd started taking photos. I found out on day 8, when she showed them to me on her phone, a grid of images taken from the car window while I walked and jogged, of my body from behind. She'd been documenting my progress. She zoomed in, circled my midsection with her finger. "See?" she said. "You're improving. That's why we keep going." Something inside me went very quiet, not peaceful, not resigned, just gone, like a light. Marco found me one night at the kitchen table at 11:45 p.m., staring at a cold cup of tea. Isla was asleep. Priya was asleep. The house made the sounds old houses make, settling, breathing, and I was just sitting there, not thinking about anything, which scared me because I used to think about everything. He sat down across from me without saying a word. He was in his pajamas, a worn cotton set with small geometric patterns he'd had since he was 13. He looked so young and so old at the same time. "Dad," he said, "are you okay?" I almost said yes. The word was right there, preloaded. "No," I said instead. I don't know why. Maybe because it was almost midnight and my defenses had given out. Maybe because he was right there, preloaded. "No," I said instead. I don't know why. Maybe because it was almost midnight and my defenses had given out. Maybe because he was the only person who'd looked at me without an agenda in weeks. "I know," he said. "We sat there for a while. I love you," he said before he went back to bed. "Whatever happens." I didn't know what that meant. I should have asked, but he slipped away before I could, and from behind his closed door I heard his phone buzz. Once, then quiet. "I want to tell you about Raymond. Priya's father is 67 years old. He spent 29 years as a paralegal, specifically in family law, at a firm that handled primarily divorce, custody, and domestic cases before he retired. He is not a warm man in the traditional sense. He doesn't tell you everything is going to be fine. He doesn't fill silences with reassurance. He is deliberate, contained, and quietly formidable in the way that people who've spent their careers watching what happens to people who don't document things tend to be. He had always paid careful attention to me. More careful, I understood later than I'd realized. He'd seen things I'd explained away. Moments at family dinners where Priya corrected me in public and I laughed it off. Times he'd asked how I was doing and I'd said fine, and he had written something in a small notebook he kept in his coat pocket. I'd thought it was a grocery list. I was wrong. He had called twice in the past 2 weeks. I hadn't answered. I told myself I would call him back when I felt less like a person being held together with tape. I didn't know Marco had already called him. I didn't know Marco had sent him the audio recording he'd made on his phone, his old Samsung, propped in the gap between the front window curtain and the sill, 3 mornings before everything happened. Priya's voice through the car window, the horn, my breathing, my crying, my shuffling footsteps at 5:41 in the morning in the dark. I didn't know Marco had already spoken to Mr. Okafor across the street, who had not only offered to write down what he'd witnessed, but had done so in 3 handwritten pages, front and back, in careful print, and signed and dated it. 77 years old. He'd said to Marco, "I've been wanting someone to ask me." I didn't know Marco had found, in his own research, this 16-year-old boy at midnight on his school laptop with the door closed so the light didn't wake anyone. The name of a family law attorney named Sandra Ibanez, whose website listed her practice specialty as coercive control and intimate partner abuse, whose office was 9 miles from our house, and who had a contact form that Marco had filled out at 12:58 a.m. with a detailed, organized summary of what he'd witnessed over the previous 11 days. Sandra Ibanez's office had called back the following morning while Priya was at work and I was feeding Isla and the house was quiet. Marco had taken the call in the backyard. My son had been building a case while I was falling apart, and he had done it with the same methodical, unhurried precision he uses when he's preparing for an exam. Outlines, timelines, sources, because he decided at 16 that if no adult in our lives was going to protect his father, he was going to learn how adults do it and do it himself. Friday morning looked like every other morning. The alarm at 5:29, the careful rolling to my side, the pull on the incision, the shoes. Isla was already stirring, which bought me 5 minutes of grace while I fed her. Priya stood in the doorway, scrolling her phone, making clear she was timing us. Outside, the air was cool. I started moving. Behind me, the low idle of the Audi. "Pick it up," Priya said through the window. "You were slower yesterday." I moved my feet. Then I saw the white hatchback, parked at the corner where the cracked streetlight is, not running, just sitting. A 2020 Honda Fit in white, which I knew because I'd ridden in it a dozen times. I knew that car the way you know the cars of people who belong in your life. The driver's door opened. Raymond stepped out onto the the sidewalk. He was wearing slacks and a cardigan, which told me he'd been up for a while, which meant he hadn't come spontaneously. He had his phone in one hand and his reading glasses folded in the other, and he was looking at Priya's car. Priya rolled down her window. "Raymond? What are you doing here?" He didn't answer her directly. He held up his phone. His thumb found something on the screen. He pressed play. Priya's voice came out of the speaker. "You stop again. We reset the whole morning." Pause. The horn. 2 short blasts. My breathing. Shallow. Trying not to cry and failing. I said move. The street went absolutely silent. Not the natural silence of early morning. The held silence of people choosing to hear. Priya opened her car door. Got out. She was in her workout clothes. She'd started wearing them for these mornings. An irony I'd stopped being able to feel. "Raymond." Her voice had shifted into the register she used for damage control. Warm. Reasonable. The voice that had convinced so many people, including me, for so many years that she was the reasonable one. "Let me explain." Raymond lowered the phone. "Marco sent me this 3 days ago," he said. His voice was completely level. He wasn't performing anything. There was no drama in his delivery, which made it more devastating than any raised voice could have been. "Your 16-year-old stepson recorded his father being forced through a street at 5 in the morning, 7 weeks after major surgery, crying in pain because he was afraid of what you would do if he stopped." Priya's mouth moved. Nothing came out. "He protected his father," Raymond said, "because you would not." Mr. Okafor had come outside. The woman from 2 doors down was standing at the edge of her driveway. A man I recognized from the end of the street was stopped on the sidewalk with a coffee in his hand. Priya collected herself. I watched her do it. The small squaring of the shoulders. The reset. "I was trying to help him get healthy," she said. "He agreed to this. Ask him. He'll tell you." Raymond looked at me, just briefly, and in that look was a question but also a statement. "You don't have to answer her." He turned back to Priya. "Sandra Ibanez has reviewed what Marco sent me, along with the statement from Mr. Okafor and the medical records from Thomas Ibarra's office." A pause. "Ms. Ibanez is a family law attorney. 11 years of practice with a focus on coercive control cases. She's aware that your phone contains documentation, photographs you took of your husband's body without his consent, used to regulate his behavior. That is, legally intimate partner surveillance." Priya's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "I watched it happen, like watching weather change over water. In addition," Raymond continued, "the recording, the neighbor's statement, and the medical records documenting a wound dehiscence caused by forced physical exertion against direct medical advice constitute a documented pattern of coercive control and reckless endangerment." He paused again. He had paralegal timing in the blood. "I've sent this package to 4 people this morning. Your office HR, specifically because your employment contract has a conduct clause. Your sister, because she deserves to know. Ms. Ibanez, who will file for an emergency protective order if I ask her to, and the non-emergency police line for this district, along with Officer Marcus Webb, who handles domestic situations in this precinct and is expecting a follow-up call from me in 40 minutes. Priya had both hands on the car door now, gripping it. "What you are going to do," Raymond said, "is call the number I'm texting you right now. Dr. Anna Choi. She is a licensed therapist who works specifically with coercive control patterns. You will call her before 9 a.m. If you do not, I will call Officer Webb. That is not a threat. It is a schedule." Priya's legs looked wrong, like they were thinking about giving out. "Raymond?" Her voice had lost every register. Just raw, stripped. "Please." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to me, and his face, which had been a mask of precise controlled language, changed. Not into softness exactly, into something more than that. Acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't need words because words would diminish it. "Marco and Isla are in my car," he said. "He packed for all 3 of you. He thought of everything." A small pause. "He's a remarkable boy." I started to say something. I don't know what. My voice didn't come. Priya moved toward me. Not threatening, not in her body at least, but her face had gone to a place I recognized, the place where she needed me to fix this for her, to look at her father, at the neighbors, at this small assembled audience of our life, and say, "It's okay. She's not what this looks like. I chose this. Tell him," she said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Tell him I was just trying to help you, that you agreed to it. Tell him." I didn't answer. I looked at her, not with the anger I'd been carrying for weeks, not with the fear that had gotten me out of bed every morning at 5:29, not with the grief of the marriage I'd thought we had and the person I'd thought she was. Just looked. The way you look at something you've finally completely stopped believing in. The way you look at the last page of a book where the ending disappointed you, and you close it, and you put it down, and you don't throw it. You just don't pick it up again. I looked at Raymond. His hand was open, palm up, not reaching for me, just available. Then I looked past him, at the white hatchback, at the back window, at Marco, sitting there with Isla pressed against his chest, my daughter's face just visible above the edge of the blanket he'd packed. He had packed her blanket, the soft yellow one she'd been sleeping with since the hospital, watching me through the glass, 16 years old. He had done everything I hadn't been able to do, called for help, documented the pattern, made the phone calls, packed the bags, thought of the blanket, and now he was watching to see if I would walk toward him. Priya stepped into my path, not blocking, hovering. Her hand came up, not to grab, to gesture, to include me in some argument she was still building. "If you get in that car," she started. I moved around her. The pavement was cold. I was still in my shoes. The sun had finally made up its mind about the morning, and it was coming through the trees at the end of Sycamore Court in long, flat, golden angles, and the light hit the hatchback, and for a second, the whole windshield was bright. I reached for the door handle. Behind me, Priya's voice cracked. I didn't look back. The door opened, and Marco reached for me, and Isla stirred in his arms, and I got in. What happened in the weeks that followed is both more and less dramatic than you might expect. Sandra Ibanez filed for an emergency protective order on a Thursday, which was granted the following Monday by Judge Catherine Osei, 19 years on the family court bench, with a reputation, per Sandra, for not being impressed by individuals who construct their defense around their partner's mental state. The order covered me, Marco, and Isla, and established temporary exclusive use of the family home while proceedings began. Priya was required to vacate and maintain a distance of 300 feet. She stayed at a colleague's apartment the first 3 weeks. Then, I was told, at her sister's place. I didn't track her whereabouts. I had other things to track. Priya did not call Dr. Choi. She called 3 different attorneys instead. 2 of them declined to take the case after reviewing the documentation package that Sandra had assembled. The recording, Mr. Okafor's statement, Thomas Ibarra's medical report, screenshots of the photographs Priya had taken of my body, and the text messages she'd sent me in the days after the wound reopened, which included the phrase, "Stop using your body as an excuse." The third attorney sent a response so hedged and qualified that Sandra called me just to read me one sentence, which I will not repeat here, but it was not a letter that inspired confidence in her client's position. Thomas Ibarra, RN, submitted a formal medical statement, detailed, precise, attached to my chart entries going back to the day 7 appointment. He noted that he had documented indicators of distress inconsistent with voluntary behavior, and that he had flagged my file for follow-up. He had been keeping records. I cried when Sandra told me that, in my car in a parking lot, alone, for about 5 minutes. Then I went and got Isla from Raymond's, who was watching her while I did paperwork, and I held her in the parking lot for another 5 minutes. She fell asleep. Priya's employer conducted an internal review per the conduct clause in her employment contract. I don't know the full outcome. I know she took a leave of absence in August. I know she did not return from it. The photographs of my body, the grid on her phone, the progress documentation, became Exhibit C in the evidentiary package. I never had to look at them again. They exist in a legal folder somewhere, and that is the last they occupy in my mind. Mr. Okafor brought his statement to a mediation session in September. He had dressed for it, a dark suit jacket, his good watch, 77 years old, and he sat across from Priya's attorney, and he read from his 3 handwritten pages in a clear, steady voice. When he was done, Priya's attorney had no questions for him. The mediator thanked him. He looked at me before he left and gave me a very small nod. I don't have adequate words for what that meant. I've tried. I didn't take Priya back. I want to be clear about that, because these stories sometimes imply ambiguity where there isn't any. There were days I missed her, the version of her I'd believed in, the one who'd been there at every appointment. I didn't take Priya back. I want to be clear about that, because these stories sometimes imply ambiguity where there isn't any. There were days I missed her, the version of her I'd believed in, the one who'd been there at every appointment and stepped up for Marco without being asked. That version had probably never entirely existed, and mourning a fiction is complicated, and I gave myself permission to do it anyway. But I didn't confuse grief for uncertainty. Isla is 7 months old now. She has discovered that her father's voice makes her smile, which she does every time without fail, and she has opinions about which blanket she's sleeping with. She doesn't know any of this happened. Someday I'll have to figure out what to tell her. Marco started his junior year in September. He is taking AP History, which he says is easy, but won't stop talking about. He has started doing the thing where he notices girls, which I'm pretending not to notice for now. On the night we came home, when the protective order was in place and we walked back into the house for the first time without her, he helped me make dinner, and we didn't talk about any of it. We watched a documentary about people restoring old buildings. We both got more interested than we expected. Later, when I went to check on him, he was already asleep. The phone with the audio recording on it was on his nightstand. I stood in the doorway for a long time. He had heard me crying through a window at 5:41 in the morning, and he had made a plan. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully explain what that is, to have a child protect you. There's a grief in it that he had to. There's a pride in it that has no ceiling. And there's a specific and particular kind of love that comes from being seen, clearly and completely, by someone who chose to see you. I had believed Priya's voice more than my own. Marco had never stopped believing in mine.